Good evening. We'd like to call this Finance and Operations Subcommittee meeting for Thursday, April 1st. See, that was tough to come out. Into session at 5:19 p.m. And one quick note on the agenda before we jump in. We have a executive session listed as the first item on the agenda. We will move that to the end of the meeting. So we will actually go through FY22 budget development first, and then we'll wrap up after the meeting adjourns with an executive session. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Hackett to give us the latest update.
Thank you, Ms. Kokoris, and good evening, everybody. Good to see those of you who we can see here. So we have continued to work on trying to get to the number that we had talked about at the last meeting. And just by way of kind of a quick review, this is the FY21 approved budget, God bless you, by three expense categories that are rolled up categories. So you can see instruction and assessment or school administration is 58.9. That includes really all staff. That's not really kind of related to bricks and mortar, essentially. That would include special education staff. It's all of it. And you can see obviously a huge percentage of our overall budget. Building and grounds, utilities and transportation, 6.7, and all of the district-wide services and technology is 7.5. So for a total budget of the current year that we're in right now of $73,218,902. So as a review of where we've come from and where we are, we brought to you back in early March a maintenance of effort budget, which came in at $76,659,152, or an increase of about $3.4 million, 4.7%. The rollover budget, as those of you who have been doing this for a while with us, is essentially, it's just that. It's really the first run of just meeting all of our contractual obligations, rolling all salaries over into the next fiscal year, making all the adjustments, contractual adjustments, and then really just making adjustments to our fixed costs, utilities, that kind of stuff, tuition, sped tuitions. So once we made that, once we got to that point, the next work for us was the next meeting that you had, which was us presenting to you a preliminary draft budget, which came in at 75,989, or 3.78% increase. Those numbers, again, those veteran school committee members and recognize that really it's almost every single year those two are kind of in and around the neighborhood that we always come in at. It's always about 3.5 or so increase, just to kind of roll over and make the adjustments for the next fiscal year. So at the last meeting, and as we talked about, the mayor asked us to, all departments, to reduce by 10% from what would have been their maintenance of effort budget. So your rolled over adjusted budget for contractual obligations, to take 10% from that number, which would have been about $76 million. At our last meeting, we came to you and talked about where we were. We've been able to get to 71,574,118, which is a $5 million reduction, overall expenditure reduction. We are right now recommending, based on the information we have on what's available for federal funding. These are funds that we know we have. We know we have $1 million in federal aid that we can use to offset. And we're looking at $400,000, which would come from our circuit breaker special education extraordinary cost account. So with that proposed revenue offset, the actual expenditure reduction is $3,685,034 for a total, for an actual expense reduction of about a little over 5%. Again, just to remind us all, it would be the $71,574,118 budget that we would be presenting to the school committee. That would be the, if the school committee was in agreement, that would be the number that you would be voting on and giving to the mayor, not the adjusted, because again, these are one-time revenues, these are offsets. So when we start, if this budget were to go through, just to play it out, when you start your FY23 budget process, your starting number would be 71,574,118, which is a $5 million reduction from the maintenance of effort budget. So, and also a couple $1 million less than our current budget. So again, it's one-time revenue sources, that 1.4. And we do know that there's additional federal aid coming. We don't have all the details on it. And we're hoping, we continue to be told by the Department of Education that the information on that aid is forthcoming. There may be some additional opportunity with that aid to do some additional revenue offset. But at this point, we have to work with what we know. So are there any questions from the committee on those numbers?
Any questions from the committee?
I do have one, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Mr. Devon? Yeah.
Thank you, sir. When we talk, I mean, I've talked with Rep. Cusack. I do have calls into the two state senators, Mr. Keenan and Mr. Timilty. I think it's important that we kind of, shall we say, reach out to them and get a feeling as to what they think, you know, the number might be as far as more what you called revenue offset. Because some of these cuts we make, just undoing them is not the snapping of a finger. It is, you know, some of these cuts are going to be, now, like I said before, devastating. They still are. But unsnapping this finger isn't like in a movie. You know, we will make cuts that turning them back on won't be easy. What is our methodology if we were to, you know, shall we say, get another million, another two? Do we have the spots we would put that money to first?
It's a great question, Mr. Devon. Thank you. And our focus, as I had said last time, with this reduction has been to protect program. To your point, when you start eliminating programs, for example, AP programs at the high school, world languages at the middle school, you know, some of the other places that I've seen other districts go to when they've been facing this kind of reduction, physical education, art, music at the elementary level. When you make those kinds of cuts, to your point, it is as many years, if ever, that you're able to kind of regain that ground, because, you know, as you know, you're going to start with a $71.5 million budget next year. If this is approved, going into FY23, that's your starting point. You got 1.4 million that we know would be available again. So you are going to be able to kind of feather out this reduction over the next 2 or 3 years. But when you take that 71,574 and just roll it over at 4.7 and they get down to your 3.5%, that amount of additional dollars needed to fund FY23 is going to be, you know, fairly significant. And you're still going to be looking at a revenue offset that you're going to have to work back into the budget, or whatever we're offsetting with that money would have to be considered for cuts. So right now, what we'd like to do, and what I'm doing this long enough to have unfortunately done this in other places, is develop two budgets. So essentially the budget, whatever we bring to you right now, it's the 71 million that's proposed. And then also bring a restoration budget, which would then identify those items that we've reduced within the proposed budget, and perhaps even additional things that we think would strengthen our program in a priority order for your discussion, and kind of set us up so that if in fact more revenue becomes available that you decide to use, then you can have a list to go to for either restoration or for additions. So it's kind of the reverse, unfortunately, of how we've been able to do it in the past, because the economy obviously is that we're in a different situation. But as you recall, we've always developed a budget, and then we've talked about, if it's more money, what can we add? And, you know, prior years we've been able to do that, fortunately, but now we're kind of doing the opposite, but it's same kind of approach. So that we're not coming into May finding out we've got to get more money and then really not knowing what to do with it.
Yeah, and Mr. Devon, our delegation spoke to the town council a couple of weeks ago, and I think they all concurred, you know, the fiscal issue that's happening because of, what happened over the last year. I know there was a little bit of optimism from a couple of them about, as the economy reopens, will there be some additional revenue? But I think the state senator, I think it was Keenan, said that, while there's optimism there, some of the optimism is against like the month of February, which traditionally is a lower revenue month. So, I agree with you. I think there, the federal sources and the state sources we want to continue to look at, but we have to focus on the 71, 574, 118, and then whatever comes in, hopefully we can bring pieces back to that. So thank you for the question. Any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your indulgence.
Through the
Okay.
chair.
Ms. Saros?
Yeah, are they still working on this? Is it like a rolling, their ongoing meetings that they're having regarding increases to our funding? Or is there like just till May?
No, the short answer is yes, and it's not just till May.
Okay.
The big unknown right now is how many federal dollars are going to come in, and what's going to be the parameters for the use of that money. In this round, and SR2 as they call it, we could use about 75%. Ed can give the right percentage toward revenue offset. The next round of funding may be similar and may not allow that. So until we know, we're working with the numbers we have, and the budget process for us every year really kind of goes right through June, and then really kind of goes through the summer into the fall when you make adjustments based on staffing changes, and you recertify your budget in the fall. So it really is, it is a working document. We don't, even though you will vote a number, we will continue to work on it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Saros. Any other questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, more of a
Mr.
a
Devon?
state
Yep.
for those who are here. When I first came on, I thought, I worked with budgets before, be they project budgets, zero-based, all the different, shall we say, types of budgets. And I thought the thing that I found absolutely fascinating was the fact that we as a school system have to come up with a budget that has to be as close to spot on, yet we don't know two variables. We don't know what we can expect from the state as far as helping us. And we don't know how many children are going to show up, that first week in September. And I always found that it was absolutely fascinating how close we could get there. And the fact that it was almost like, a moving target, so to speak, that in spite of the fact we know we have numbers here and we're willing to vote on them as a snapshot in time, not knowing that we can conceivably get more or less from the federal and or state government, and not know what students may show up at our doors the first week of school. So I think people have to understand that this is extremely difficult, and I marvel at how we do it every single year. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Devon. Dr. Hackett?
Well, and just to that point, I don't remember exactly when it was, 4 or 5 years ago, that we had an influx of students all at one school, all at the same grade level. For some reason, it's just the way it worked out, and we ended up having to add an additional position, reconfigure a media center into a classroom, and it is to Mr. Devon's point. There are some pretty big unknowns that in the private sector or in other public budgets. Generally, you always have unknowns, unexpected unknowns, but not knowing your revenue exactly and not knowing exactly how many students you're going to have going into the school year it creates a challenge, certainly. So when I go back to the categories again, looking at FY22, just the rollover budget is in curriculum instruction and assessment. Administration is 62 million. I won't read this all to you, but just to break down the maintenance of effort budget into those 3 categories again. And then you can see the proposed budget in the 3 categories, and then you can see the reductions. And not surprisingly, because we are a people industry, and the bulk of our budget rests in staffing, curriculum instruction, and school administration and other, the reductions are going to be more heavily leaning toward that portion of the budget, because that's kind of where the money is. So these numbers may change over time as we go through this. This number, if the school committee were to adopt it, would stay the same, but how we get there will continue to evolve over the coming months. And so the 4.5 could be more or less, and these reduction amounts could change and likely will change over the course of the spring as we go into the end of the school year. So if we're just to kind of, again, go back and talk a little bit about what we had already done. This was when we made the first adjustment to the budget, not the one we're talking about right now for the proposed. We have 5 elementary positions that we can eliminate based on enrollment. And we were able to accomplish those eliminations through attrition. So those are not actual people. Those are positions that we can eliminate and not replace given retirements. And then we had some additional positions as well that we're anticipating that there will be a retirement, but we need to replace the position currently. And so the kind of the differential between what someone's leaving at on the scale as they retire and what we replace, and where we hire the incoming person as a replacement, that net difference for us right now, we're estimating to be about $375,000. So that 670 was the adjustment we made to go from maintenance of effort, the 76, to the preliminary draft budget of 75. So as we move forward, and we talked about how we get to the number, and recognizing that our goal, as we talked about, is to stay away from the classroom as much as we can. There's not a lot of stuff outside the classroom in Braintree, because we are pretty lean, and we have a lot of fixed costs that really we can't adjust. But one of the things that challenges us, and we talked about this before, is that our neighborhood schools, which it's kind of they're great to have. It's a blessing in so many ways, and for kids to be in their neighborhood and be able to go to the school down the street, so to speak, also creates some inefficiencies. And as we try to look at how we can make reductions without impacting program or eliminating program, one of the things we really have to look at is our enrollment trends. So, as you know, and this is through 2019, I didn't bump it out to 2020 because the numbers are just a little bizarre right now. We could see kind of where the bubbles happen, right? So we know from 2014 to 2016, and this is grades K through 4 on the top line, we really saw the increase of the bubble that was going through at that time, which then in 2017 transitioned itself to the middle school and continues to work its way through the school system. So, we are seeing a reduction in our enrollment K through 4 as a result of just the enrollment bubble that was going through. And one of the things when we think about, for example, South Middle School and the construction project, and East Middle School, and bringing the 5th graders to the middle school to eliminate or gain space at our elementary schools, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that it really, as much as it was about enrollment at elementary level, it was much more about our use of spaces. So over the years, we were breaking up classrooms for small group instruction, for special education support. There were a lot of rooms that we had to take over, you had to take over the course of the years, to provide mandated services and to provide the level of support for our student population that they need and deserve. So part of the crunch on our space issues at the elementary school that led to the conversation with the MSBA was mainly driven by not having the appropriate spaces to provide services. And I think you all remember and know, and currently still the case, that we are, at times giving services on stages. We're doing, sometimes in hallways. We're finding every little bit of space we can to provide those support services. So that really, the need for that extra space and moving grade 5 into the middle schools is allowing us, and we're already benefiting from it, obviously with COVID and the spacing requirements that we've been under, has helped us tremendously at the schools that have currently sent their 5th graders to East. So even though the numbers are declining, that move of the 5th grade into the middle school is critical, because we just did not have appropriate spaces and enough space to provide the full range of services to our kids. So we have the bubble moving through K4 2016, and then you can see when you come down to the next line, grades 5 through 8, there's where it starts to hit. And now it's starting to transition into the high school, which you can see from this line where our high school population is going. High school will have the largest enrollment, I believe, next year or the year after, that it's had in many, many years. So if you're just looking back to 2019, about 1,400 kids, and now we're at 1,715. What is interesting is we are starting to see a little bit of a breather, a little bit of a decline, but when you look at the enrollment projections overall, that's going to stabilize and will start to become flat and show even perhaps a little bit of growth. So if we just focus on the elementary K through 4, understanding that this line 5 through 8 really, its East has grade 5, South does not yet. So Liberty and Highland still have their 5th graders. But if we just talk about what are the resource opportunities here that we could look to help get through this budget crunch and try to make sure that we're not eliminating program, really need to look at the elementary level in our elementary schools. So this is a multi-year look from 2016 to 2019. Again, I didn't include 20 because 20 was just such a strange year. Partly also because grade 5 moved to the middle school. So the numbers were they didn't really make a lot of sense. You would have seen significant drops in the schools that moved their grade 5 to East Middle School. But if you look at 2016, and this excludes kindergarten, because we have options with kindergarten, obviously with an adequate kindergarten center, we've been able to kind of leverage that and make adjustments and times put an additional section of kindergarten in a home school. At times we haven't been able to do that. So we have flexibility with kindergarten. But if you look at from 2016, you can see what happened when actually 2016 was the first year I kind of got here. This drop in Liberty from 460 to 432 from 617 to 18 is a direct result of the flexible boundaries policy that we implemented, because we were so crunched for space at Liberty that we were looking, it was potentially we're in a situation where we would have to consider a modular unit. So we implemented the flexible boundaries policy that allowed us to have kids who would otherwise have been attending Liberty go to Hollis, which Hollis has good flexibility with their space. It's also centrally located, so we are able to get students to Hollis from other schools relatively efficiently. And then you can just kind of see where that continued. That's the result of the bubble going through and dropping that number. It's also still reflective of some flexible boundary moves that we made from Liberty to Hollis. Then you'll see Morrison. Morrison, goes from 421. You see the bubble at 426, and in 2019, you see it come down a little bit to 405. You can see Highlands here. Highlands is relatively stable. We see the enrollments don't change tremendously at Highlands. And if you just look at these numbers, 403, there was a dip to 390, but now in 2019 back to, if I can see the number, 398. And then you can see, I'm sorry, this is Highlands. Sorry about that. That was Hollis. And Hollis's numbers would have gone up a little bit because of the flexible boundary kids. So Highlands took a dip right there in 2018, but is now back up to 394. And then you can see what's kind of happening across the town. So while you go back and you look at our enrollments, and you can see that, over the last several years, we've lost a little over 150 kids. Where they've come from isn't necessarily equally distributed. again, taking the exception of Liberty out because we use flexible boundaries. But you can really see that two of the schools that have been hit the hardest with the enrollment decline or have lost the most kids as a proportion of their total enrollment have been Flaherty and Ross. Flaherty has bounced around a little bit, around 350-ish or so. In 2019, we saw it dip down to 321. That number is a little bit lower this year, but it stabilized some. And then we can see at Ross, 262 in 2016, and has dipped down to 237. Again, this does not include kindergarten students that are at the home schools, and it also does not include, it includes grade 5. So the grade 5 has not moved out of these numbers, which, as you know, Flaherty, Ross, Hollis, and Morrison grade 5s have moved to East. So you can see that number is going to be even lower just by the fact that 5th grade has moved out of the school. So when we talk about staffing and we talk about trying to not cut program and efficient use of our staffing, the challenge is that we have schools with lower enrollments, lower populations that have in some cases no more than 2 sections per grade level. So I just rough numbers, if you have a grade 2 that has 30 kids, you have to have 2 sections of 15, and you're not going to go with 1 section of 30. And so you lose really the flexibility that you would have on the kind of the economy of scale if you had 3, 4, 5 sections of that grade level where you can absorb more kids. And the break point as to when you really need to add an additional staff member is reduced, because you just have the ability to distribute the kids over 4 or 5 sections versus if you only have 2 sections. And we are experiencing that kind of district-wide, particularly on, with Ross and Flaherty, where a lot of our grade levels are 2 and 3. And that's not to say that, we don't have other schools that have 2 or 3 well, no school has 2, but that has 3 sections, but it's more pronounced at Flaherty and Ross. So when we pull these schools out, Morrison, Hollis, Flaherty, and Ross, and just kind of look at where we are with the numbers, we believe that there's some opportunities here to do some consolidation and be able to maintain manageable class sizes with fewer sections or with fewer, let me say this, with the same or less resources that we have currently. So, but the problem is where the kids currently are, and they're not, when you have 2 sections and you can't make a move to reduce to 1, as I just mentioned, the only solution to that is to bring more students in. So we are continuing to look at this. I just want to show you a little bit about kind of what some opportunities might be and what I'm talking about a little bit more specifically. And Mr. Lee, if there's anything I missed, this would be an awesome time for you to step in.
I feel like Dana White, just running the Jeopardy clock for him, or whatever game show that was. No, I think obviously, the issue that we've been most exploring is where are the numbers and how do we realize more efficiencies as we examine what those numbers truly mean. And there's been a lot of work done by a number of people to kind of get us some data that is going to assist us in this work. And I think here it comes. How's that?
Thank you so much. I apologize if it's small and hard to see. It's a little fussy in terms of zooming in and out. But so the outer line obviously is the town of Braintree, the town line. The elementary schools are all marked here. So Flaherty, Ross, Morrison, Hollis, Liberty, and Highlands. The challenge here in town, obviously, is that there's a lot of activity in here. We have Route 3 running through. You have, these schools are relatively small neighborhood schools, but we all know that the distance between Flaherty, for example, and Highlands, whatever the mileage may be, multiplied by the traffic that you have to get through, makes it difficult to do much consolidation or to even sharing resources is tough. So we have, even in our smaller schools, we don't have a full-time physical education teacher, for example. So that person is split between 2 buildings generally. We have quite a few staff that is true for. My apologies, hold on just a second. How do I do? Oh, there's TJ Maxx.
As long as it's not Southside Johnny's.
Yeah. So to go back to, or try to go back to the point I was trying to make, when you're sharing staff, whatever the staff may be, special education specialists, speech and language, that kind of thing, you automatically lose 2/10 of their position, 20% of them, because you have to allocate time for them to travel. So when you have a full-time person and you really only can employ them 80% of the time, that creates certainly an obvious inefficiency. And often those positions, especially in special education, are premium positions. You know, a speech and language person, physical therapy person, those jobs are, and those people are harder to find due to licensure requirements and other issues. So, you know, when you're automatically going to lose 20% of them because they're traveling between 2 buildings, that is an inefficiency, and it's really a resource issue. So when we look at just kind of where the students are, and I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. I'm going to call up the Ross students. So they are little orange fish, no particular reason. So Andrew Marin has put this together, and I gave him free reign on the icons, which might not have been a good idea. You can see where our Ross students are. You know that Ross is not, there's no buses to Ross in general, but it is a walking school. You're going to see some students who are winding up down in here that look a little farther away, and that's because these icons represent students who also may be in full remote. As you know, at the elementary level, we have a full remote academy. So we have students who are actually participating or have a teacher who isn't necessarily a Ross teacher. So we need to, we'll continue to clean this up. But you can see kind of the range of territory that Ross covers. When you add Morrison to the picture, you can also see, where Morrison pulls from. This, to me, is a fascinating exercise, just as in terms of just thinking about, and we've been dealing so much with transportation lately, trying to stand up our buses, and we will have them up and going next week, expanded transportation at all levels, including allowing transportation, providing transportation at the high school level. But when you think about, if you were going to sit down and draw out where schools pull from based on efficiency with transportation, this really isn't the map that you would come up with. And just to zoom in a little bit, so you can see Ross kids kind of interspersed with Morrison students, but when you look at the distance and just take this student over here as an example, and we are transporting them all the way across the river, under the, whatever that rhyme is, through all the way down to Morrison, which with traffic is not a small deal. Yet Ross is here. So as we talk about trying to become more efficient and also more equitable, this is an opportunity that we need to look at, and that we are looking at in terms of thinking about how we might be able to utilize resources differently, and allowing us to make reductions in the overall budget without, again, cutting program. So I'll also just kind of show you, and just from a transportation standpoint, there's just no question that there's efficiencies here, rather than bringing all these students down all the way down here. If Morrison just really kind of focused on this side of the river, then transporting these students to Morrison is a lot easier than transporting students from up in here all the way down. So again, this is just a preliminary exercise. We really have worked hard to get to this point right now. And we're still working on just internally on what this might or could look like. And the question remains whether or not is, how much money, so to speak, or how much of a reduction could we make if we thought about where we send our students a little bit different. I'm just going to add Hollis. It's just another good example. And Mr. McDonald explained it to us today. And because Manataqua at one point was a school and students went there, because I asked the question, we were curious as to why would we bring students who are on the other side of Route 3 through the circle, the Rotary, or through the square in a place that is heavily congested, as you know, at most times of the day, all the way over to Hollis. And it goes back to Liberty was a school, then it closes the school, and Hollis ended up picking up these students here. But if you just kind of look at the distribution of students and where we're pulling them from, we also think there might be some opportunities here too. To think about where our kids are going and whether or not we, for example, can bring the two sections of grade 2 that are 14 apiece. If we could bring more students into that grade level and go to 4 sections of 20 or 22, clearly there's economy of scale, there's efficiency to be gained. So that is really kind of a high level conceptual view of the work we're doing. It's going to take us some time if we are going to move in a direction when we're thinking about where we're registering and enrolling our kids. And I say that because I don't want people to panic, and I don't want, I want people to also understand that, if we make these kinds of changes, we've got to do it right. I have done this once before, and I learned some lessons a little bit the hard way about this process. And there's just a lot of considerations. The good news is we've also had quite a bit of experience when we moved our 5th graders to East. And so we've been down the path before. And, again, it's an option. And you as a school committee ultimately have to really make the decisions as to whether or not the recommendations that we're bringing to you are something that you want to support. We believe this is the right pathway to get to the reductions to start anyway, as opposed to us coming to you and asking you to cut world languages at the middle school, as the example I gave before. Because to Mr. Devin's point, once you make those programmatic cuts, you are forever trying to get them back. So that's where we are. I'm happy to answer any questions. Mr. Lee, if I missed anything, please feel free to step in.
Thanks, Dr. Hackett. Any questions from the committee?
Through the chair.
Oh,
Sorry.
Ms. Saros?
Yeah, I mean those drawings are kind of fascinating to see, and it makes complete sense with whatever option we choose. But I mean, summer with traffic, especially this fall, is gonna kick in big time when businesses are starting to send their workers back. We need to take a good look at all of this. That's it.
Thank you. Mr. Devin?
Yeah, I think it's important for people to realize the history of this. And you see some deviation as to where students are living and where they're going to school. And it harkens back to, decades ago when we had an actual Abraham Lincoln and a Watson school. And I think at one point in time, there was 10 elementary schools. And if you could name them, I'll give you $50. That used to be schools in Braintree, but they're no longer. Noah Torrey was one. And the deviation has gotten, shall we say, smeared over the years. And this type of a reset, I think, will help us as far as people think that their neighborhood school is here based on quote unquote tradition and things like that. Well, no, I remember where I lived. I would go to Ross now, but there again, I went to Lincoln. And then at one point in time, the old Perkins School. So I think if people go back and you look in history, for history's sake, and not just for that, but you look and you go, okay, where should I be going as far as these efficiencies? And it may make sense that, you get more of a homogeneous group if you do, shall we say, redraw the lines as far as what might work for us. Efficiencies for us, but you see, like I said before, this deviation where there are kids in certain neighborhoods that, even though they might live across the street or through a bit of a piece of woods or something like that, go to vastly different schools. I think that there might, not just for the efficiency part, but for the sake of the students themselves, there might be a positive there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Devon. Yeah, I agree. I think that when you look at those graphs, Doctor, I think that, you know, you see that over the years, how the inefficiency has kind of built in. Because again, you can't predict, you know, year to year where the population for each school is going to be. And, you know, I think that you made an excellent point about, you know, sort of providing equity as well. You know, when you look at those maps, it becomes very apparent that you've got dots for a school that are, you know, passing another 2 schools on the way, you know, on a bus or whatever. So I think it's, you know, it's a great exercise. I look forward to hearing more about it. But I agree with you. I don't want us to cause panic or alarm, because I think we're basically, you know, looking at every option that's available to be efficient before we get into cut programs or cutting things that really hurt, you know, and are difficult to get back. So I appreciate, again, the work that you've been doing. And I know, as you said earlier, the process never ends, right? We do come up with a budget number. And if people remember how things went in the past, like even last year, we always came up with a preliminary budget number. And then we had other options as more money became available. And, you know, we were proud to say many years we dipped well into some of those other options as, you know, funds became available. So I think we're all optimistic that, you know, we're kind of looking at the base scenario with the $5 million cut or the 5%. But hopefully, as more news comes along, we're going to be able to pick away at that list of things that we'd like to put back in place. So, thank you.
And I would just add, thank you. And I would just add that any kind of savings that we're talking about potentially with the resource distribution is year-over-year savings. So this is a savings that's going to continue to give to the school system, so that when the revenue picture looks better, you might be able to talk about things other than trying to deal with, you know, elementary level classrooms. You could be talking about programmatic things that you could actually start to have a serious conversation about adding program. You know, whether it's another foreign language at the high school, or more of, you know, business vocational opportunities at the high school, or whether it's something else. The resources that become available, hopefully, as the revenue picture improves over the coming years, you've made a reduction that will live on, you know, for a period of time. So I also would just want to, you know, say that ever since I've been here, there's always been whispers of Ross closing. I don't think there's been a budget year I've gone through where I haven't had that question from teachers or parents. Are we going to close? Are we going to close? And we need the space. But if we don't utilize the space that we have better, it really, you know, puts us in a situation where you can't have a school with a full administrative support structure of, you know, all the specials and special education providers with, you know, under 200 students. It's just not, it's not fair to the rest of the school system, candidly. You know, and I do often get a question about, you know, class sizes at Highlands or Liberty, and when, you know, you look across town and they're much less or lower at other schools, is totally a function of the fact of what we just, you know, what we talked about. You can't have one class of 30, you got to have 2 of 15. So that built-in structural inequity is, I think, important for us to, this is an opportunity for us to manage that in a time where we have to find money for budget reduction. I just think it's the right approach. I know it's not going to be easy, but, you know, absent that, you know, we're going to be talking about things that that are going to be affecting a lot of kids for a long period of time. So I appreciate the questions. We'll continue the work. I believe that the Finance and Operations Committee, Subcommittee, you probably ought to schedule a meeting for next week, maybe Wednesday or Thursday, whatever works for your schedules. And I know that you'll be providing the school committee with an update on Monday night as to the conversation this evening.
Yes, thank you, Doctor. I believe we have one Monday before the school committee meeting.
I think we had talked about the possibility of not having that one.
Okay,
So
so we'll possibly move that
to Thursday.
to,
Right?
yeah, perfect. Yep. Makes sense. And if it means anything to anybody, back in the day, I went to South for a year and then Central the next year because we opened a third middle school. So, you know, we've all experienced it at some point, those of us that have been in town for a long time. And I think it's exactly what you talked about, Doctor, is just, you know, again, as things evolve and the population shifts and changes, it does make sense to go through the exercise, even if you don't have to do anything. It just makes sense to look at efficiencies in the buildings that we have. So appreciate that. Okay, any other questions from the committee? Okay, anybody have anything else to add before we? So we're going to be looking at a future meeting date of next Thursday, I believe, Dr. 5:15, 5:30.
Yes, that'd be good.
Okay, yep, and we will be giving this update from tonight's meeting to the full school committee Monday. And if we don't have anything else, I will take a motion to adjourn, and then I will take a motion to enter executive session. So let me take the motion to enter executive session. Consideration to enter into executive session pursuant to Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, to discuss strategy for the negotiation of collective bargaining, as the chair declares that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating and/or legal position of the Finance and Operations Subcommittee. So do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second,
I have a motion and a second. Roll call vote, Ms. Saros,
aye.
Mr. Devon,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. So I'll now entertain a motion to adjourn. We will not be coming out of executive session back into session. We will be adjourning the meeting.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second,
So I have a motion and a second. Roll call vote, Ms. Saros,
aye.
Mr. Devon,
Aye.
chair votes aye. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate everyone's attendance this evening, and the meeting is now adjourned and we'll be going into executive session.
And you
Thank
have,
you.
you should have the link now to the executive session.
Thank you, Doctor.
Oh, geez.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Good
Good
night.
night.